When I eat steak and eggs or something like that, I just don't have a lot of hunger.
Dr. Shawn Baker is a leading advocate for the carnivore diet.
As you get a little bit older in life, you start to realize that health becomes more of a priority.
He's also an orthopedic surgeon and a world record-holding athlete. His controversial approach to nutrition has helped spark a global movement, challenging conventional dietary beliefs and transforming lives.
Don't put your health in somebody else's hands. You need to be empowered to realize that you have a huge impact on your health outcomes and basically your quality of life.
Welcome to the Hava Podcast. Today we talk about the pros and cons of a meat-focused diet, including a recent dramatic study on what it can do to cholesterol and heart disease. We talk about what health conditions it can affect, what it does for the environment and for athletic fitness. And also, how does Shawn eat in a day? It is, I would say, unusual. So, Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andres. Appreciate it. It's good to chat with you again.
Going to be an interesting conversation, I'm sure. I would love to just start out with your sort of background story. You're a doctor, you're an orthopedic surgeon, but now you've become one of the biggest advocates in the world for this all-meat carnivore diet. How did this thing happen? How did you get pulled into this?
You know, like many of us, as you get a little bit older in life, you start to realize that health becomes more of a priority. And I had been an athlete my life. Even while I was practicing as a surgeon, I was still a competitive athlete. And I noticed about, I guess in my early 40s that I just wasn't as healthy as I wanted to be. I was probably developing metabolic disease. I didn't formally test it, but in retrospect, I'm sure I was there. So I experimented with just a number of diets because I already thought I'd maxed out the training aspect because I was a very successful competitive athlete. So I was training, I had plenty of exercise. So I played with different diets. And at that time, this is back about 13, 14 years ago, the standard recommendations, which they still are, were basically, reduce your fat, eat mostly a lot of plants, eat lean cuts of protein. And I did that, and I did successfully lose weight doing that. But I just found that I just couldn't sustain that. To me, I was constantly hungry and not particularly happy with that particular approach. And so then I kind of went down sort of more of a lower carb rabbit hole. I first started on a paleo diet, did that for a year or two, and then I kind of started being exposed to some of the low carb thought and some of the popular books that are out there. Gary Taubes's infamous book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, was one of the ones that kind of got me started on this sort of path. Low carb, I did a ketogenic diet for a couple of years, and stumbled upon a group of crazy people doing an all meat diet, which I thought at the time was absolutely absurd and crazy, like kind of everybody thinks it is, and many people still think it is. But I was open-minded enough to say, let me just try this, because I was seeing people talking about, quite good results. And, looking back and as an athlete, looking back historically, that there were athletes that predominantly ate meat and were very successful. So I thought it would be, one, it'd be an interesting experiment. And two, I thought it might help me athletically. And so back in 2016, I embarked on 1 month of this crazy all meat diet. It wasn't called the carnivore diet at the time. It was called a zero carb diet. And I had a small following on social media, on Twitter mostly. And I think I was at about 3,000 followers at that point. And, we kind of joked about how it was going to kill me. Obviously it was going to kill me. I was going to die of scurvy or
of course
have an immediate coronary or, MI or something, or my colon would fall out from lack of fiber. And curiously, none of that happened. In fact, I felt great. And so I went on to sort of, some people were watching, and I continued, I went back to my regular sort of ketogenic diet after that, and I just didn't feel as good. And I thought, well, all things being equal, I prefer to feel better than not. And so I, somehow talked 100 people into doing this diet, and we recorded data. This is back in early 2017. And 100 people did it for 90 days. Average weight loss was around 13 kilos, 8 centimeters off their waist, resting heart rate. Some of the weird things we could measure for free. Resting heart rate went down by 8 beats per minute, which I thought was curious. And then symptomatic, then just basically subjective measures. How do you feel? Gut, mental health, all these things all improve. We actually recorded bowel frequency because that was one of the criticisms. You couldn't have a bowel movement. And it turned out to be on average 1.2 bowel movements per day, and it's kind of like people laugh when you say 0.2. It's, obviously it's a statistical average, but so yeah, we did it. And then of course it started to get more notice. Obviously Joe Rogan had me on his podcast at the end of 2017. And then that sort of blew things up a lot, and so then it's been controversial ever since then. And so I've been obviously advocating for this. And as you probably, anybody who listens to me in more than just a superficial manner knows that I advocate for this as a therapeutic intervention. I don't say everybody needs to do this. I think there's plenty of ways to get healthy outside of a carnivore diet, but I think it uniquely, fills some roles. And I know we're going to talk about satiety and things like that, probably. But I think, it can be a very healthy diet for people in certain situations. And there's certain people that I think it uniquely helps better than anything else they've tried, which is very interesting. And I know we've had, at least 50 years of, I would call it nutritional dogmas, telling us that particularly red meat was awful for us and we should minimize it and cut back on it. And it's had a very curious place within the modern diet. It's one of those things where, well, there's some healthy parts of it, but we should keep it at a very small amount. And so it's interesting to see how this has been evolving. And, what I've seen on a small scale has now been replicated on a very large scale. I think you certainly have noticed that there are a lot of people that have tried this diet, and many of them have had very good success for various reasons. And we can get into what, might be. Maybe it's all about satiety. Maybe it's about something else. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, as everybody listening is aware, this is a very controversial approach, of course, and there's been a lot of criticisms or fears about potential health risks, etc. I do think that from my perspective, it seems you are one of the more sort of grounded and more scientific-minded proponents of this approach. Of course, you are a practicing physician. What kind of reactions do you get from your colleagues or other people in the healthcare field?
It's obviously mixed. There's those that have tried it, which have a very different perspective than those that have not. And they look at it superficially. And most, even I've been promoting this now for, I guess, 7 years. This is my 8th year. I'm about to be in my 8th year doing this. I've been promoting it for probably almost as long. And there certainly are a large number of physicians that now sort of accept it as a reasonable treatment option for various things, particularly things like inflammatory bowel disease, which I think it works very well for. And then of course there's people that think, you're going to everybody's going to get heart disease and die. And I think I'm sure you're aware there was a recent study that was just presented by Matt Budoff that, may start to shift the needle a little bit. Obviously there's a lot of pushback against that, but I think that, most physicians, as I'm sure you'll recognize, don't even regard nutrition as anything even worth talking about to most of their patients because they just feel it generally doesn't work. And I think we've just been giving people the wrong nutritional advice for 50 years. And because it hasn't worked, they just kind of dismiss it, completely, that it's a waste of time. Patients can't do it. Why bother? Let's just give them the medications and or they give lip service at best, or so very sort of minimal advice, which I think, if you're gonna use nutrition as medicine, which I think we can, or at least use that sort of approach, you have to be, you have to give them more than a 5-minute talk. You've got to provide support. You have to provide resources, and it takes a lot of work. It really does. It's a lot easier to write a prescription and see in 6 months type of thing, which is how medicine is practiced generally. But I've gotten a lot of physicians now that have experienced this and themselves personally. Because a lot of people, like I would have never recommended this to anyone had I not tried it myself personally. And I think a lot of us find that the only reason we get interested in nutrition is we have this sort of personal epiphany that, wow, wait a minute, I feel really different. This has made a big difference in my whole life. And then you start to put the scientific, scrutiny to it and see if it holds up.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned a very brand new study, and I think we'll get to that very soon. But I would love to just wrap up this sort of your story with it as a doctor. I mean, I know you have opinions. You work as an orthopedic surgeon, um, and you mentioned, doctors generally perhaps do not talk all that much about nutrition. I don't know how much nutrition did you have in med school. What's your take on the whole the way that modern healthcare works when it comes to lifestyle related diseases?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's given lip service. I don't think we really have any sort of, I think most physicians acknowledge that there are people that are sick due to their lifestyle, but they don't really have any really constructive tools which can help combat that. And I think that, at least in the United States, I mean, a lot of our medical education is funded by the pharmaceutical industries. I mean, that's just the reality. It's been paid for. And so we're kind of taught. I mean, I had the basics of nutrition. I learned what pellagra was and scurvy and, things of that nature, beriberi, and then certain vitamin deficiencies and a very, very rudimentary.
Not super common diseases.
Well, stuff you never see anymore, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, it was, but during my orthopedic training, I never, ever, I can't even remember ever reading a textbook or any lesson where nutrition was talked about at all. I mean, there was some superficial sort of reference to, if you have a really poorly, malnourished patient, they're going to do bad surgically with an outcome. You might look at their albumin or something like that, but never any real constructive, like, hey, if this sort of diet is carried out for a period of time, these conditions will get better. That's just not taught, or at least wasn't taught to me. And I think that's the experience that most, allopathic physicians have, at least in the United States. And I can't speak for Sweden because, not there, but I suspect it's similar.
It's very similar, I say. But I think that's a very interesting perspective you bring up. Like, we as doctors, we get taught about these vitamin deficiency diseases, beriberi, pellagra, stuff that scurvy.
We'll never see.
Like you said, we never see it. Like, if you see it once in your career, that's it. And yet, at the same time, at least, for most doctors who work clinically with patients, maybe the majority of patients have nutrition-related lifestyle disease that we're not focusing on except by prescribing medications. Is that that's the way you see it?
Andres, is interesting. One of the reasons I chose orthopedics as a specialty is because my experience in primary care was that I saw a lot of frustrated patients and a lot of frustrated doctors. It was basically the doctors say the patients weren't compliant and the patients felt like they weren't getting better. And I felt that orthopedics would be, well, somebody comes in with a broken arm or broken leg, I can put a metal rod down there, fix them, and they're out the door. And then it was sort of a, my early thought was, I would just do that and not have to deal with the non-compliance. But what I came to learn as a guy who practiced for several decades, that most of what I was seeing, even though it was orthopedic, was still lifestyle related. The arthritis, the tendinopathy, the tendonitis, the peripheral compression neuropathies, all that in retrospect is responsive and influenced by lifestyle and nutrition. So, I mean, you can't get away from it. Even as a surgical subspecialist, you can't get away from lifestyle.
So do you give lifestyle advice to your patients, and what kind of reactions do you get from your colleagues regarding that?
Well, I do. I mean, and I'm not actively doing surgery anymore, Andres, because I went full time to, doing the company I have now. And so, but yes, I that's basically almost exclusively what I talk about at this point is just lifestyle stuff, because it is, for me, it's more rewarding to me personally. It felt good to, do a knee replacement on somebody or replace their shoulder or fix their ACL or something like that. And, but at the same time, I still liken it to kind of a very expensive Band-Aid, because you're still, even though you're replacing someone's knee, you're not really getting rid of their arthritis. I mean, you are, sort of impacting that joint, but the disease is still there. The arthritis disease is still there. The surface of the articular surface has changed, but I mean, the joint still have arthritis in it. There's still the synovial surroundings, the soft tissues around there, and the rest of the body. So now I think there's more of an opportunity to holistically, actually change the course of disease.
Cool. And you talk about your new company. Maybe we can get into that. What is it that you do, and how are you trying to help people, and what's this carnivore diet anyways? Like, what are you supposed to be eating if you do it?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the company. I'm wearing a shirt, Rivero. And so this is just, we have licensed physicians in all 50 states. I'm the chief medical officer and co-founder. Our mission is basically to do what I'm talking about. Take people with various sort of illnesses that we can do. It's all remote. So we're a digital health company. We're focusing on metabolic and inflammatory autoimmune conditions, which is what we've seen, a good response to with lifestyle. Carnivore diets is not the focus of the company. Now, we will use that as needed, and I think some patients will benefit from that. But it is more of kind of there's a general pattern where we'll sort of remove, I think, certain common problematic foods, and then sort of do a bit of an elimination phase, hopefully mitigate the disease, and then sort of reintroduce. And I said that's sort of the overall thing. We've got, like I said, the physician leads the team. We have coaching, we have, AI software, a lot of technology attached to that. And so that's what the company does. Now, you ask about, carnivore diet. Well, it's sort of what it sounds like. It's basically a lot of meat, basically. For the most part. And there's some people have some variations on that, but it's kind of interesting. So this was not called a carnivore diet 10 years ago. It was called a zero carb diet or something else. And I just called it the carnivore diet because a publisher asked me to write a book about my experience. And I was like, what am I going to call this thing? So I kind of said, well, carnivore sounds pretty cool. And it's stuck for whatever reason. That has been the name that has, I guess, had the most traction. And so there's been a lot of people now that have sort of opined on what they think a carnivore diet is. For me, it is basically, an animal-based focused diet, and with minimal to no plant food. So it sounds crazy, but it does seem to work for a number of people. And I know it's kind of funny because it's become almost cult-like. You get people that label themselves the carnivore superstar, and it's kind of funny on social media. And that's not my intention. My intention was this is a therapeutic protocol, and it can be used for a period of time. Some people want to do it long-term. That's fine by me, I think. But its focus is really to, one of the things, and I know you'll probably agree with this, there's a lot of people that struggle with, I think, food addiction. I think that's a real issue. And I think, this is almost a complete abstinence approach to that, just like you would do with alcohol or any other, sort of recreational drug. I think there has to be a period, or ideally there's a period of complete abstinence. And I think this effectively does that. And that's one of the things, I interviewed a gal, 800 pounds, 800 pounds. And she tried everything. She got, bariatric surgery, every dietary regimen you could think of, vegan diet, juicing diets, Weight Watchers, on and on, calorie counting, until the cows came home. And she said she went carnivore the first time she found the off switch. It was the first time she felt that she could actually stop her compulsions and addictive behavior. And she's able to she lost 500 pounds in under 2 years, which I think is remarkable. That's amazing. Yeah.
I think that there is something to what you're saying. Of course, a lot of ultra processed food can be highly rewarding and potentially addictive. And if you go on a carnivore diet, you are basically excluding all of that, right?
Yeah. Ideally, there's hard to make an ultra processed carnivore food. I guess you could, and I hesitate to call yogurt ultra processed because I don't think it is. As you know, there's a difference between processing and ultra processing. There's actually a standard definition of that, and I think it's really, really challenging to make an ultra processed all animal based food that anybody would eat, in my view. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of these ultra processed foods are addictive, and they're addictive by design. There are literally, as you probably are aware, there are food chemists that literally their job is to make this food very, very addictive by nature. And I've talked to some of them that actually have regretted that they worked in that capacity. But yeah, it's interesting that this is, in the American diet, it's close to 70% of our diet right now is ultra processed food, which is absolutely shameful in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone listening might feel like it sounds strange that we have food industry trying to make their food addictive. Why would they want to do that? Well, it's just
why would they not? Why would they not want to do that?
Why would they not? Exactly. It's just they have a responsibility to their shareholders to increase profits, and it's hard to find anything more profitable than to make your products addictive, because then people eat more, buy more, profits go way up, right?
Absolutely.
So basically they have to do it, or someone else will come in and do it and take their market share, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely true. There, like I said, unfortunately, as most things come back to greed and producing extra money. So yeah.
Well, or at least it's the way a capitalist system works. Unless, I suppose, either government comes in or people change what they eat and buy, then things can change. But I don't think we can expect the food industry to solve this problem, or what would you say?
Well, I think you touched on it. It's going to be driven by market demand, and I think really what you have to do is convince the people that this is not in their best interest to continue to eat this way. And the problem is, like I said, when you tell a smoker it's not in their best interest to smoke, most of them still smoke. So it's what is the better option for them? And I think that's really the problem: is how do we find something that's sustainable that they actually can do and enjoy, because the food tastes good. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit ultra processed food tastes delicious, and it's just like, why would I not want to eat this? Because it stimulates these reward centers, and to tell somebody that you need to give that up is tough unless you have something that you can replace it with in many ways.
Yes, indeed. So, since you have now become this big advocate for carnivore diets, who should test it, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, most people end up do this kind of as a last resort because it seems so, they can't imagine their life without, so much variety, because there is such variety in the world. I mean, you go to the grocery store and there are literally 10,000 products to choose from. And you're saying you want me to restrict it to a handful of, foods that are the same thing every day. I think somebody who is, recalcitrant to other treatments might be a good way to consider it. I mean, there's a lot of people that have tried a lot of different diets. They've been on different medications and have not gotten relief. I think people that are struggling with food addiction, this is very effective. I think particularly certain autoimmune diseases have had relatively good success with this. And I think, in my view, things like Crohn's disease, which, unfortunately is becoming more and more common, ulcerative colitis, the so-called inflammatory bowel diseases, in my view, that should be like a first-line treatment, in my view, because, the normal, if we look at the normal sort of pathway for that, it's, well, let's put you on some corticosteroid drugs, or maybe even we'll put you on some immune modulating biologic drugs, which are very expensive and they tend not to work over time anyway. Then they keep switching that. And then often you end up with some sort of bowel resection, particularly, with Crohn's disease, where I think many of that could be avoided. And you could sort of fix whatever the underlying problem is. And I think that's still controversial. And then maybe later you can sort of introduce a more varied diet, which I see very often. I see people with pretty severe either ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and they go on carnivore for 6 months, a year, and then they're able to start to reintroduce other foods. And I think that to me, that's an optimal outcome, rather than what the typical standard of care sort of treatment is. So there's people with, recalcitrant mental health disorders, which seem to get better. I think, this is something that, I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Chris Palmer and George Ede and some of these other folks, and myself, who's been saying that nutrition has an incredibly vital and important role with mental health disease, just like every other disease. I mean, the brain is an internal organ, just like the heart and the liver is. And so there's no reason it's no reason to think that nutrition wouldn't impact mental health disease as well.
Yeah, it's probably does. Of course, we need some pretty good evidence, I suppose, to be sure about how this works. Are you aware of any good evidence for like why could carnivore diet work well for Crohn's disease, for example? Do you have any theory about that? Or
yeah, I mean, there's some evidence around gut hyperpermeability. There's some evidence around sort of the energy requirements of the enterocytes. Those things have been looked at. A friend of mine, Dr. Pran Yoganathan, is a gastroenterologist in Australia, and he's looked at that. And that his thought is that Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis have to do with inability of the cell to properly fuel itself. These particular colonocytes and enterocytes, and that by providing them a stable energy source, i.e., maybe perhaps ketones maybe have a role here. I think there's some evidence that, clearly, whatever gut dysfunction you want to call, whether it's dysbiosis due to an altered microbiome, which certainly has to have somewhat of an impact. I think it's very complicated because, the microbiome is incredibly complicated. It's very dynamic, and there's literally trillions of organisms and thousands of species, and who knows how they interact in conjunction. And then, the concept of gut hyperpermeability, which is, our gut is permeable. That's by design. But when it becomes too permeable, we see the initiation of inflammation, perhaps autoimmunity. This is based on the work of guys like Alessio Fasano at Boston's Children, who's delved into that quite a bit. So, I think there's a number of things that are going on. I think just general poor nutrition may have a role. I think that our standard American diet, while replete in calories, is fairly deficient in some of the nutrients. We look at the overall nutritional status of even Americans who are by and large, obese, still have some holes in their diet for sure.
Yeah. But speaking of different diseases where carnivore diet could potentially be helpful and all this science, well, there are also diseases where people fear that it might be harmful, right? Like heart disease, cholesterol goes up. You do see that in some people, I suppose, on a zero carb or carnivore diet, that LDL levels, total cholesterol levels, can go up quite a bit, at least in a minority of people. And I know there is a new study that came out, which is controversial, but shows interesting things. Do you want to share some about your thoughts on it?
Sure. I think that the sort of mainstream lipidology cardiology hypothesis is that heart disease is primarily driven by elevated LDL, or more specifically ApoB fragments over time. So the higher they are, the longer they are, the more likely you are to progress to cardiovascular disease. And I think that probably holds true for the majority of society. I think, because the majority of society also has other comorbidities, particularly in these times. So we have some people that are saying, well, wait a minute, what if I don't have those comorbidities? What if I'm quote unquote metabolically healthy? And that really has not been looked at, because most of the cardiology data is not on healthy people. It's on people that are diseased. And when we look at imaging studies or, plaque progression studies, you already have a subset of the population that's already been identified as sick, right? And so what this new study was presented was like, what if we had actually healthy people and we examine them and see what happens with their ability to tolerate high LDL, I suppose. And that, initial study that Matt Budoff presented, again, it's baseline data based on roughly 5 years of very, very high exposure to LDL cholesterol, something, 2, 3, 4 times the upper limit of what's considered normal, did not seem to have any significant progression of or any significant incidence of coronary artery disease relative to a age match and health match control group, which is interesting. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you can ignore LDL cholesterol, and just because you're on a low carb diet, you can have LDL can be as high as possible. I think that is obviously overinterpreting the results of that study. Now, obviously, there's more to come. They're checking it for a year to see what any progression that occurs. CCTA, which Matt Budoff is one of the world's leading authorities on, says that is more than adequate enough time to see if progression occurs. And so we'll have to wait. That data will be available in February, or at least they'll finish acquiring the data in February, and then whether or not it gets presented in, April, May, something like that, we'll have to wait for that. But I think that, in my view, and again, maybe I'm wrong here, but I tend to view LDL cholesterol as part of the causal pathway, which I think that's pretty clear, or ApoB, I guess I should be more specific. But I think there is something that, I think there are dependent variables that can mitigate or exacerbate, its potency. And I think that's a fair statement to say. And so, in my view, and I talk to people about this all the time, because they'll go on a carnivore diet and they will fix some horrible condition. Maybe it's inflammatory bowel disease. Maybe it's some intractable mental health condition. And their LDL cholesterol will go up. Some do, some don't, as you mentioned. Some people it doesn't go up, some people it does. And I don't know. It's hard to predict who will and who won't. But I will frequently ask them, I will tell them, hey, by your LDL cholesterol going up 50%, your heart disease risk may have gone up, potentially. And most of them will tell me, I don't really care about that at that point, because I feel so much better. And I think as physicians, we have to take that into account.
Maybe they care once they get their heart attack.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. They would care once they get the heart attack, but then you're like, well, maybe you can take a lipid lowering drug, whether it's a statin or a PCSK9 inhibitor or one of the other, bempedoic acid or whatever's out there now. And so some of them might want to use that as a strategy. A lot of them are concerned because they don't want to have side effects. Some of them just frankly don't believe it. They're like, I feel so good, there's no way I could be at higher risk for heart disease. And empirically, that kind of, I can see where you get that. And it seems to make, because your question, why would every single biomarker of health improve and just one variable go up? How does that match up? And it's kind of interesting to sort of justify that. And I mean, because I know there's a wealth of data showing that LDL cholesterol is causal or it's necessary. The question is around sufficiency, and I think that's where this new data may shed some light on that. But yeah, I don't casually dismiss LDL cholesterol like some people. I hear some people saying it doesn't matter, it's not important. I'm low carb, it's not important. I think that's a dangerous tack to take. I think it means, hey, let's get some more information, maybe monitor more closely. I think imaging can be very helpful. So that's what I usually recommend. Hey, go get a CAC score or something along those lines. So at least you have, if you're going to roll the dice, at least you've got some sort of window to see what's going on, because that's what I did. I mean, because I've been on a ketogenic diet and a all meat diet for a long time, and I had a CAC score. I'm due for another one. Actually, I'll probably get one this year or next in 2024. And it was 0, which is comforting. It's 52. Right. I'm not that at the time. I'll be 57 in a few weeks. And, I mean, I know like my ability to perform as an athlete, my cardiorespiratory system is very, very good. So it's unlikely that I've developed significant cardiovascular disease. I mean, it's possible, but again, I think it's unlikely. VO2 max go ahead.
For the people listening, CAC score is basically you do a CT scan, you check your coronary arteries to see if you have calcium stuck there as a sign of heart disease. Yeah. So a score of 0 means you don't have that, and that's a very good sign. If you go back to the study, I haven't read it in detail yet, but I followed the debate on X, and apparently they exclude people with baseline coronary heart disease, or at least some people, because it wasn't considered ethical to keep them.
I talked to Dave. I think the total number of people excluded for that reason was 1. So it wasn't like they excluded massive amounts of people for positive CAC. I think there was actually 1 person excluded from the study due to that. But you're correct in that they were concerned about the ethics of that, because there was maybe you're familiar with the Western Danish Heart Registry study that was done by Mortensen in 2022, where they showed that 0 CAC score was not associated. LDL was not associated with any evidence of what's the so-called MACE outcomes and major adverse cardiac events. If there was a 0 CAC, LDL cholesterol had no bearing whatsoever on whether somebody progressed to, heart attack, stroke, sudden death or revascularization. And so, but despite that, it's considered that if somebody already has disease, it is theoretically dangerous to let them persist in a very high LDL state. So that's one of the reasons they did. I think it was just to get through the IRB in a way, because they were like, we don't want people dying during our study, which is, I think that's a safe way to do it. So what they're looking at is, what about healthy people? Is LDL cholesterol a problem for otherwise metabolically healthy people? And I think they've I don't think they fully answered that question, but they've started to sort of examine that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, what you're saying sounds relatively reasonable. I mean, I think I have a similar interpretation myself. LDL is necessary to get heart disease, but if everything else is perfect and you have a modestly high LDL, is that the problem? We don't really, as far as I understand, have any good data. And this study is, of course, an interesting extra new knowledge into that, and we'll have to follow people much longer, I guess, to get the full insights from this. But at least preliminary data kind of pointing in that direction, saying that if everything else is perfect, you're metabolically healthy, and your LDL is somewhat high, then at least you're not gonna instantly get heart disease. It it seems to be taking some time at least.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair statement. And I think that this is really some of the first data to answer that question. Like I said, I mentioned that Western Danish Denmark study that sort of also kind of looked at this in some degree. But the question is, how long does it take? Because we always hear that heart disease takes decades to evolve. Now, these people are in their mid-50s, so I mean they've gotten at least some level of, it's unlikely you're going to find a lot of heart disease in 20-year-olds, but you start looking 50s, 60s, 70s, and that's where we start really seeing it. And so I mean, it's interesting, and there's more to come. And obviously this isn't the defining study on this question, but I think it does raise a question. It does sort of maybe make people say, is LDL always a problem if it's elevated? And as there are people that have heart attacks with low LDL, and there's people that don't have heart attacks with a high LDL cholesterol. And the question is, what differentiates those people? And I think that, and I guess over a long enough period of time, if we're talking 90-year-olds, I mean, honestly, I probably will die of heart disease. I mean, that's just what the odds are. I mean, hopefully at 90 rather than 70 would be preferable. But, over a long enough period of time, everybody's going to die of something. And then again, of course, we put in the all-cause mortality part of the equation. And it's like, is it better to die of a heart attack or to die of cancer? And I think that's another sort of discussion.
As long as you're 90 or 100, I think that's pretty good anyways. But yeah, maybe the bottom line is just that LDL cholesterol is just one major factor among several, and they all matter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, and they do. And I think, there's some studies that will show that perhaps diabetes is the biggest risk, for pre-diabetes or insulin resistance may be a more powerful factor. I mean, that's also controversial depending on who you talk to. But I think there's no downside to improving your metabolic health. I mean, I think that's a fair statement.
For sure, and if LDL goes way up, then maybe it's worth tweaking your approach a bit, or maybe even, depending on your risk factors, maybe even going on some medication. Is that fair?
I think that's fair for some people. I mean, again, you have to sort of, as a physician, obviously you have to give them full informed consent and let the patient make the decision. You give them the best information you can.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we leave cholesterol and go back to carnivore diets, and you actually sent me what you eat in a day, and I was slightly surprised, I guess. Do you want to take us through it yourself, or?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I that was what is today? Today's Monday. So I think it was my meals on Saturday. I think I sent it to you on Saturday because you asked if I'd do that, and I said yeah. And so I think I ended up eating around, I think it was about 3.5 pounds of ribeye steak. I had like 3 steaks that day, 2 for breakfast. I had a little bit of dried steak that I sometimes make as kind of like a little snack. And then I ate a bunch of yogurt, some Greek yogurt, non-fat Greek yogurt, which I know you're a big fan of. And that was my diet. That was my day. And I think it was around a little over 5 pounds of food, which is, it sounds like a lot, but I'm a as you know, I'm a pretty big guy, and I'm training hard. And that was probably, as I mentioned to you, that was probably slightly more than an average day. But just because I've ramped up my training as I'm getting ready to try to set some records, I just need more, as I train harder, I just need more fuel. It's obvious. And so, but that's not atypical at all for me. That's a pretty typical day.
Yeah. So 3.5 pounds of ribeye, 32 ounces of non-fat Greek yogurt. I added it up in our program, and got 528 grams of protein in a day. That's
a lot, isn't it?
That's like the most I've seen, I think. I know you're a big guy.
Yeah.
I'm a tall guy, but you're tall and wide, like strong as few others. 5,300 calories. Is that the normal day?
Yeah, I mean, again, if I am not training really, really hard, I'd say normally I'm probably closer to about 4 to 4,500, 4,000, 4,500 would be probably me at maintenance. And if I'm trying to lean out, I'll probably drop down into the 3,000 range. But yeah, that's not atypical at all for me. I mean, like I said, it's, I've eaten way more than that in the past. I mean, years gone by when I was in my 20s and 30s, I could easily pack in 7,000, 8,000 calories a day. I mean, and very easily could do that. So I'm used to eating a lot.
You're a big eater, a big guy. So we also looked at satiety. We haven't talked about that much in this podcast yet, but it's our approach to sort of weigh together all these different factors. How much does this food promote over or under eating, or sort of normal balanced satiety levels? And the way we do it, the way the scale works is 0 is the least satiety per calorie. That's basically your worst ultra processed food like donuts and chocolate and so forth. 100 is the highest per calorie, and there's where you have leafy greens or something. And then 50, we try to aspirationally make it some sort of normal balanced satiety per calorie level foods that can drive people to eat a normal amount per day. Your foods got 63 average, which is a little bit on the higher end, which would in theory be a good place if you want to become really strong and lean. What do you think about that?
It's not surprising. I mean, I think that, I think a meat-based diet is very satiating, I should say. I know there's a difference between satiation and satiety, I know you guys like to talk about, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I hear very often is that when I eat steak and eggs or something like that, I just don't have a lot of hunger afterwards, which I think is a good thing. I think that's one of the problems we have is, a lot of these low satiety foods are just, you just have to eat and eat and eat and eat. You can't stop eating those types of things. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised the scores are, and again, I would not want to eat 100%, 100 satiety score diet. It would be, to me, unpalatable. If I just ate leafy greens all day, that would be awful.
That's not the goal.
I'm sure it's not. Yeah. And so I think it probably is, it probably sort of validating that the score is what it is, because I think that's how I feel. I feel like, I felt like I'm completely satisfied and completely, and it my goals, my aspirational goals are strength and, fitness and relatively decent body composition. So I think it supports that for sure.
Yeah. So the idea with this scoring is that, if you want to lean out a bit, then try to go a little bit higher. That would support you in sort of eating more calories, wanting to eat more calories, fewer calories. And vice versa, if you're getting too lean, if you want to have more energy for exercise, you find it hard to eat enough, then go down a little bit. How does that sound to you? Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, obviously there's energy, and there's, if you're going to do things, you need energy. I think the problem is we have people that get a lot of energy and don't want to do anything, and then that really is
actually a pretty rare problem, I guess, in the US today and most of the developed world, I suppose. Yeah, very few people need to eat more, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I think that's quite fair to say.
So, speaking of sort of the obesity epidemic, or this epidemic of metabolic disease in the US and around the world, that is something that now affects most people. According to some research, 93% of adult US people have poor metabolic health in some way, either waist circumference is high, or blood pressure is high, blood sugar is high, cholesterol is off, etc. What's your take on the main cause of this? Because this has changed quite profoundly over the past few decades.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's obviously there's more than one factor. I don't think there's a significant genetic component to that. I mean, I just dismiss that as a fact that, I mean, yes, genetics can impact to a degree, but that's not the main driving factor. Our genetics have not changed appreciably over the last 100 years. I mean, we're still very similar to what we were 100 years ago. I do think that a high, sedentary behavior has become more the norm. I think that is clearly part of the problem. But I do think our food, our food availability is also a major problem. I think that, again, this, as you point out, this high access to very low satiety, high energy food, and if you want to call it ultra processed food. And I think the ultra processing does impact the quality of the food in a way. I think when you turn things into powder, you change the surface area significantly, and you change the absorption characteristics of that. I mean, I mentioned that there was a study shared by Darius Mozaffarian saying that, up to 22% of our calories are often consumed by our microbiome, but if they are ultra processed, that's kind of bypassed. All these flours and sugars and things like that don't really get into the distal part of the digestive system. They're kind of absorbed proximally, where there's very little interaction with the microbiome, and so we're actually absorbing more calories than we did 40 years ago, even though we might be consuming the same amount. And although we've consumed more calories in the U.S. from the 1960s to about 2000, at least according to Mozaffarian, that from 2000 onward, caloric consumption is about the same. It's just that we've consumed a much greater percentage of ultra-processed foods, which I think is interesting. So more powders that we consume, the more we absorb, the more calories we absorb. And so we're ultimately we're taking in more. But, even though we may not be eating more, we're taking in more. So that's part of it. I think that, chronic stress probably has a role. A lot of people are, just subject to chronic stress. I mean, poor sleeping habits. I think people are, as poor sleep leads to increasing insulin resistance, which often leads to poor dietary choices, which allows us to overconsume. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, we're eating too much of the wrong foods. I mean, that's the ultimate problem. And then we're also not moving in a way we should. And I know that's calories in, calories out type of thing, but I mean, that ultimately is happening. But at the end of the day, what are the variables that are driving that? And I think that's the things that we look at. The success of these new GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs, I mean, points to that drug is not a calorie drug. It is a hormone satiety drug, right? I mean, that's why they're having success with it. So they're addressing the satiety aspect of it, and lo and behold, people are losing weight. And so, can you do that without the drugs? And I think certainly you can, but that's a harder way to do it. But I think, in my view, it's a better way to do it. But again, like most things, easy gains are often kind of cheap gains that may not be lasting.
Yeah. So why do you think it's better to do it with foods rather than these satiety hormones, the GLP-1s, the Ozempics of the world?
Well, I mean, let's just use this analogy, and I'll use this as an analogy, and I'll get into this. So if I were to exercise and I go running, my heart rate's going to go up, right? I mean, that's a normal physiological response. I could sit on the couch and administer a drug, dobutamine or something else, and make my heart rate go up, right? Is that the same thing? Most of us would say, no, it's not. You're obviously not getting all the benefits from that. And so I think when you are artificially invoking incretin hormones, I mean, they're there for a reason. I mean, we have GIP proximally, we have GLP-1 distally in the ileum, we have the ileal brake. And so that's that physiological phenomenon is supposed to occur in response to specific environmental nutritional stimuli, right? And so we're artificially doing that. Does it work? Yeah. Does it? Yeah, it does it. But is there a downside to that down the road? Just like, let's say I put someone on exogenous testosterone, right? What happens to their natural endogenous production? So are we going to see endogenous GLP-1 and incretin hormone suppression to where once we're off the drug, we've got problems with that? I mean, there's some long-term studies show that many people regain most, if not all, the weight afterwards. They're very expensive drugs as well. I don't know how much they're being used in Europe. I know they're being pushed very heavily in the U.S. Novo Nordisk out of Denmark is, pushing it in the U.S., but I don't think they even use it in Denmark very much. And so it's kind of interesting how this is playing out. And we're being kind of told that there's nothing you can do about obesity. It's not a lifestyle disease. Just take these drugs. I'm concerned,
it's certainly interesting phenomenon where doctors or other experts say that, hey, this is a genetic disease. Obesity is genetic. Nothing you can do about it. Just take the drug, and then they're being funded by this drug company.
By the same companies that make the drugs. Yeah, that's Fatima Stanford out of Harvard, she happens to sit on the U.S. Dietary Guidelines panel, which is, I think that's a little bit concerning, quite honestly.
I mean, we do have it's definitely worth looking into what should be allowed. But there's an interesting situation now where, okay, we have the food industry is producing these ultra-processed foods that cause people to eat much more, making a lot of profits from them, of course. And then you have the pharmaceutical industry coming in with these drugs to mitigate the health problems that are caused by the food, and everybody makes a lot of money. And but the question is, is this ultimately good for people, eating this kind of food and then having to take a lot of drugs to mitigate the side effects, for your weight, for your blood sugar, for your blood pressure, etc., etc., etc. You could add 10 drugs to take care of these eventually.
Yeah, I know there's some company who was trying to develop an exercise pill. You can get all the benefits of exercise without exercising, and it's the same sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think you and I would agree, no, that's not the best optimal way to deal with this. Obviously prevention is better than sort of treatment or mitigation. But there are a lot of people, if you could say, hey, if I could eat chocolate cake all day, every day, and just take a pill and be healthy, they would sign up for that, 99 times out of 100, because, they're just, I think honestly, they have a lot of issues with addiction around this stuff. And I think it is almost predatory that we have industries that sort of rely on that and support that. So yeah, there is a better way, and you know that, and I know that, and fortunately, there are a lot of people that are sort of catching on to this, and I think it's a good. Now,
it's interesting what you just said, that we have addictive foods here. Like, if you were to eat, or I was to eat chocolate cake every day, I would probably develop lots of health problems, and then I have to take all these medications. And I must say, but at least I had chocolate cake every day. But I wonder, how happy do you really become if you're addicted to, sugar and fat cake all day?
Yeah.
Do you really enjoy it if you eat it all day, every day? Would you be happy? I mean, I don't think I would be.
No, you won't. And actually, there's studies that show that consumption of those food actually leads to depression. But in the short term, it's just like the heroin addict. I mean, they get that short term reward, which ultimately leads to chronic disease and maladaptive behavior. And so, but yeah, but it's tough. Because we like these short term rewards. That's why social media is so addictive. We got these little 130-second clips, and you can't stop looking at this stuff. It's
just one more.
They've hacked the human mind. I think is it Rob Lustig has talked about this, I think, and they know what they're doing. And it's we are manipulable creatures. And
indeed, indeed. Let's go back to carnivore. If anybody wants to try it, do you have some favorite meals to give people suggestions?
Yeah, well,
you recommend?
My first thought is that in order to be successful, with any dietary regimen, one, you got to like the food. If you don't like it, you're not going to eat it. And two, it has to provide a level of satiety. You can't be hungry all the time. I think those are pretty solid, in my view, recommendations with regard to being able to sustain some. We can all experience hunger for a few weeks. We can all knuckle down and do that, but long term, we're not going to be able to do that. No one's going to be successful being hungry all the time, and no one's going to stick to a diet they don't like. And so, if you don't, for some reason, like ribeye steaks, maybe you got dropped on your head as a kid, and I'm just kidding, but I tell people, just find some sort of animal products that you really think you're going to enjoy, whether it's ribeye steaks or seafood or chicken or pork or poultry or, whatever you like. Eggs, perhaps eggs and bacon is quite tasty for a lot of people. Start with that. And just get used to doing that. I did it one meal at a time. I said one day I'm going to have bacon and eggs and no toast, no orange juice. And that was my introduction. And then I did 2 meals, and then I did a day, and then I did 3 days, and I did a week. And then I finally mustered up the courage to do a month. So I think, do I tell people that, obviously the goal is to focus on animal foods. If you need some sort of spices to make it exciting, go ahead and start with that. Dairy products it's kind of an interesting, and I'd be interesting to see what your satiety dairy sort of interest is, because as you mentioned, I ate a bunch of yogurt, which I like, and I generally tolerate it pretty well. It's not something I eat like all the time, but occasionally I'll go through phases where I'll do that. But I tell people a lot of times dairy used kind of sparingly in many cases, because it can be easy to overconsume, particularly liquid dairy or things like cheeses, which can be very addictive. I'm sure maybe your satiety stuff might point to that, depending on the types. So that's, be creative, have fun with it, enjoy it. I don't tell people to count calories and that stuff initially, because I think really the goal early on is really to sort of maybe break a food addiction, or maybe get past these cravings. So you eat enough, and you may not lose any weight initially, but then after, you adapt to this 2-3 months, and then you can tighten it up and dial things in. I think that what I tell people is, there's going to be some cravings at some point, and you have to have a plan in place. Failure to plan is planning to fail in my mind. And so what are you going to do when the cravings come? Often these cravings are tied to hormonal surges, things like ghrelin, as I'm sure you're aware, and those tend to be time limited. So, like you got a craving, it's going to last 30, 45 minutes, figure out a way to get through that, move on, and then likely you'll be fine. So, I mean, there's a number of things that I tell people, for people that want to do it for a particular reason. I think, like I said, first, number one is change your relationship with food. I think that's got to be the first task, because we eat for non-nutritive reasons all the time. We're bored, social pressures, stress, what the time of day it is, that we're just used to it, and we not even be hungry. So change that relationship to food, so you're eating for nutrition. You should still enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy every meal. I mean, I've got 2 ribeye steaks waiting for me after I got a few more interviews and stuff like that. But afterwards, I'm going to enjoy every bite of that stuff, and it's not like I'm depriving myself. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy my food.
Pretty delicious, or can be. I would love to hear your point of view, because I totally agree with you. You can't just count calories, restrict calories, be hungry. Nobody likes that, and it's not sustainable long term for the vast majority of people, anyways. And also, like you said, people have to be able to enjoy the foods that they eat. So, I mean, the approach that we're taking, which I think is very compatible with carnivore and many other diets too, is to look at the satiety per calorie of various foods. And the idea is, we eat intuitively, we eat to satiety, but if we do it with ultra-processed foods, with, low protein, high energy dense, very hedonic, very rewarding foods, then we end up eating way more than we need. But if we eat intuitively until we're satisfied, until we have satiety with real foods, such as meat and eggs and such, then we tend to eat the amount that we need, and then we're just not interested in eating more. So what do you think about that approach? I guess it's,
I think for obesity, I mean, and that's a huge problem. I think that's a very solid solid sort of scheme. I guess, and obviously a lot of diseases are obesity related. So if you can get people to normal body weight, you can reduce a lot of suffering and a lot of disease in the world there. And I guess depending upon, because I know there's a sort of belief that, well, ultra processed foods are not going away, which is true. They're not going away. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden all the box food is going to be magically gone. It's always going to be part of our diet. And the question is, do you just say, hey, I'm just not going to eat that stuff. I'm just going to leave that stuff alone and just eat single one ingredient foods the rest of my life, which I think that's a viable and quite honestly a very healthy option for a lot of people. But then you have these people that are like, well, I still want to be able to have these different types of foods, and how do I decide which one is going to provide me the most nutrition with the least calories, and the most satiety with the least calories. what I would say is that, depending on what you're treating, like I said, if I could probably design a diet that is optimal satiety per calorie that still makes people sick, based on certain autoimmune conditions. Maybe they have gut intolerances, because I think we have to really. That's why I think the elimination phase of carnivore is so helpful. And that even though you could design a satiety per calorie, like mine's 63, we could probably design a satiety per calorie diet 63 that would actually still be problematic for that same person. So I think even within the context of satiety, you still have to consider gut irritants and sensitivities, which how much percentage of the population that affects, I don't know. It could be 10%, it could be 30%. Hard to say. I mean, we have 20% of the population has IBS in the US, and I don't know where it is in other places. Yeah. So we do know that the ingredients matter, irrespective of maybe even how much satiety they provoke. So I think as a general scheme, it's a good place to start for sure. And I know you guys are refining, and I know it's maybe like if somebody came to you with Crohn's disease, would you tailor your program any differently? I mean, that and I don't know if you're planning even to treat that. So I mean, it just depends.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not claiming. Well, first of all, it's a work in progress, as you know. We're constantly refining it, and but secondly, I mean, it's focusing on this satiety and helping people to eat, the amount that they need while still having satiety, while still not being hungry, etc. But it's not. We're not marketing this in any way as a sort of miracle cure for anything. It's certainly not. It's potentially a very effective tool for weight, metabolic health, body composition, strength, those kind of things. I mean, I think actually a lot of people who are into this for fitness purposes could also benefit, because it's of course you need a lot of protein, but then you're gonna have to eat, if you want to be strong and lean at the same time, you have to get that protein without a ton of extra calories and energy, right? And then you need to look at the protein percentage of foods, not just the protein grams, right? But there are other things that matter too, like how palatable foods are, how energy dense foods are. So I think it can be a really effective tool, even for body composition and fitness purposes. Like you want to get really strong, really lean. Well, then this is a good tool, I think, to help find the foods that help you get there in the easiest way.
Yeah, one of the things, because we discussed this, in text back and forth, because I was talking about that I have this dried meat that I consume. Now, obviously, I've taken all the water out of that meat, and so it's less satiating for me. I can probably consume the same number of calories in a much smaller volume, and therefore probably overeat that. And I think that's something that, like you think about how there, as you probably are aware, there are studies showing that if you just chug a bunch of water, it will blunt your appetite for a period of time, not forever, but I mean 30 minutes or something like that, and then and that may be enough to bypass a craving.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of studies showing that the energy density of food has an effect on how much we eat, right? So if we dry meat, well, then we remove the fluid from it, and you get more calories per gram, so that the satiety per calorie actually goes down a bit. I don't think it affects it all that much, because you talk about dried meat, you still have a very high protein percentage. The hedonic scoring, like the addictiveness of it, is relatively low. So I still think it's you might be able to eat a little bit more than unprocessed just fried meat, but I don't think the difference is all that big, actually. What do you think?
I know I almost prefer, and we mentioned this, the salt does have a role in my mind. If I were to sit down and eat unsalted steaks, I would consume less of that, I think, for sure. I mean, I just don't even prefer, I just don't do it because I don't even like it that much. So I think there's that factor. I think that, I guess I haven't rigorously tested it in my own self, but I just know that I'll take like 4 or 5 pounds of some cut of steak, slice it thinly, salt it, dehydrate it, and then I can just sit there and eat most of the bag in one setting, which would be, but I can, at the same time, I can eat 3 pounds of steak in one setting too. So it's kind of interesting to see where that is. But I suspect there is an effect. It may not be huge, but there is some effect. And because I get a lot of people talking about, hey, I'm having a hard time putting on weight on a carnivore. I get a lot of young athletes that are like, I want to put on muscle and I just can't eat enough. And I say, yeah, I agree. It's challenging. You have to sort of, and that could be one way to hack that, is to dry the meat. You're still getting effectively the same amount of calories, but in a little smaller volume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's interesting what you mentioned about salt, because there are studies showing that you get more of a reward value from foods that are high in fat or carbs if you add salt. And of course, the food industry knows this, and that's why we have salt in all the ultra-processed foods, or not all of it, but in a lot of it, because it drives people to eat a bit more.
You've probably seen the reports saying that one of the biggest things you can do for health, of course, is epidemiologic data, is remove salt from your diet or limit salt in your diet. And I wonder if that's due to the fact that it provides for this hyperpalatability so that you just overconsume calories, or if it's actually the salt itself. And I don't know how to, I know there's people that think salt is great and we should have more of it. And there's other people that think the other way. I don't know if you have any insight into that.
That's a very interesting point. I mean, I think that there is clearly a connection in the data, at least, and then there are also studies showing that eating less salt, people do get less heart disease, etc. But the question is, is that for people who already have high blood pressure, etc., or is it for if your blood pressure is sort of on the low side, if your metabolic health is really good, would it still have a negative impact? And I think there the data is much less clear, and it's also theoretically much less clear. Maybe it's not an issue.
Yeah, because I eat effectively zero processed food, and so I have almost no salt in my diet outside of what I add on top of my steaks. So I mean, maybe the net is I eat less than the average person. Who knows?
Anyways, let's move on. Some people are not carnivores; they are, plant-based. And you have some interactions with them. What do they think about what you're doing?
Obviously they disagree.
I don't want to put them all in one category, but there are some people who are active online. And what's your experience?
Well, again, I think online is different from real life for sure. I mean, I've interacted with people in the plant-based community in real life, and it's always been very pleasant. And I'm very pleasant to them, and it's very cordial. Online becomes, anonymity and sort of, kind of crazy nastiness. Obviously, they don't agree with what I espouse. I mean, they're like, everything they've been told is that animal products are killing you, giving you heart disease, cancer. It's cruel. It's destroying the planet. All of which I disagree with, obviously. And so, it's one of those things where I don't think the evidence is strong either way, to be honest. I don't think we have just tremendous data, particularly when we start talking about longevity and, prevention of disease 20, 30 years down the road. I just don't think we have good data. I think the data that would suggest one way or the other is weak at best. And this is in line with guys like Gordon Guyatt, who was the guy who actually came up with the term evidence-based medicine. He's out of McMaster's in Canada. He's been talking about this for 30 years. He's one of the world's leading experts on how do you grade the level of evidence, how strong of the evidence you have. And he basically says that the evidence that would point to meat being deleterious to our health in any ways is at best very weak, very weak signal. So, I mean, that's what you have out there. And so I'm not going to be the guy saying that go on a carnivore diet, you'll live forever, because I don't know. I have no clue. I don't think there's any evidence that would show that. But at the same time, I don't think the people that are saying go on a plant-based diet because you're going to live forever are accurate either. I mean, I think it's unknown and perhaps unknowable, quite honestly. So I think my focus has been on here and now. If I got somebody that's sick and I can get them healthier, which clearly I've demonstrated that does occur, at least in many people, then for me, that's as good as you're going to get, in my view. And if you want to live to 150 and be like Dave Asprey or one of these guys that think they're going to take 100 supplements to make them live forever, go for it. I'm very skeptical, though.
And nobody's lived to 150 yet, that's for sure.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, Andreas. When I was in Afghanistan working as a surgeon, we had a patient come in who I thought was about 65. with a broken arm that was fixed in Pakistan and was all messed up, and we had to redo it. And the Afghan surgeons, we were asking him how old he was, and they said he was 150 years of age. And I said, I don't believe you. But apparently the evidence was he could name some king back from 150 years ago when he was a kid. I said, well, guess what? Abraham Lincoln. It was just kind of, it was kind of comical in that regard. But maybe there's a hidden tribe somewhere that secretly lives to 150. Maybe.
That's a bit of a long shot. But going back to vegans and carnivores, I mean, the way I see it, these are both approaches that can work. You can improve your health on a carnivore diet. You can also improve your health on a plant-based diet. Seems at least that way to me. I mean, you're in both ways, you are likely perhaps to avoid ultra-processed foods. When it comes to the carnivore diet, your protein percentage are going to go up a lot. The plant-based diet, your protein percentage actually could go up too as a percentage, but at the very least, your energy density of the food is going to go down, fiber is going to go up, you're avoiding hyperpalatable foods. Basically, these are two different ways to get away from ultra-processed foods, and they can work. What do you think about that?
Well, I think in general, the tendency on a plant-based diet is for protein to be lower. You can dial it in so where you have higher protein, and particularly if you're using processed protein isolates, you can certainly do that. So it's doable, but the general tendency is to be lower in protein. Now, the other thing is, it's also very possible on a vegan diet to be very ultra processed. In fact, we know that plant-based diet folks eat more ultra processed food than meat eaters. The studies actually clearly show that. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to eat a significant amount of your calories ultra-processed on a carnivore diet. So I think there is some inherent differences in that, because there's all kinds of vegan junk food. There's very little to no carnivore junk food. So I think there is that distinction. I don't disagree that there can be people that can be healthy on a vegan diet. I usually push back on the fact that they're usually accusing us of some ethical compromise or animal abusers and murderers and all that type of stuff. So I kind of push back on that. And also the fact that they will demonize animal foods as the ultimate problem, when I think it clearly is this low nutrient dense, ultra processed, I call it human pet food, which I think a lot of us are eating.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with that. Of course, it's challenging to get to 500 grams of protein on a plant-based diet unless you do.
I would have a sore gut. I would have a sore gut for sure.
Plant-based protein
powders. If I was eating that in beans, I would be in trouble. So would everybody around me.
That's probably true. And also, like you say, you can of course eat pretty easily a lot of ultra-processed food on a plant-based diet, unless you watch out for it, and maybe not on a carnivore diet. In a way, carnivore diet is kind of foolproof. It's almost impossible to fail, or is it?
Well,
what would you do wrong in that case?
Well, is it possible to still overconsume on a carnivore diet? Yes, it is. I know there's people that say it's impossible to eat too much. I think when people start bringing in a lot of concentrated fats, butters, and drinking heavy cream and those types of things, then you can potentially start to get into this process where you overconsume. Like I generally tell people, don't drink your calories. I think that is you would probably agree with that. Drinking calories, particularly with sugar sweetened beverages, are one of the all-time worst foods possible. I'm sure it scores a 0 on your. This probably got to be a Coca-Cola's got to be a 0 on your satiety score, I would imagine.
Well, it's actually 18 or something like that, because
18, really?
We kind of reserve the lowest scores for sort of energy dense fat and sugar combinations. So yeah, of course, it's going to pull everybody's average down for the day. It's still very, very low.
Yeah.
But arguably, like a chocolate bar or a donut could drive even more overeating. What do you think?
Interesting. Well, I think they're all bad, and I think this concept that there are no bad foods is a problem in my view. I think there are bad foods. I really do. Doesn't mean you can never eat them, but you realize this is not good for me. And moderation, which the current definition is no more than 3 times a day, I think is what, I don't know what moderation means anymore. It's like, eat a birthday cake on your birthday and don't eat it on everybody else's birthday, because that's 365 days a year. I tell you, I
Always
interviewed a
someone's
guy
birthday.
who was 770 pounds, and he literally was addicted to sugar sweetened beverages. And I mean, he would 20 a day. And I mean, that's why that at 14 years of age, he was 600 pounds, which is in my mind, mind boggling. I've never heard of anybody at that young of age being that big. But again, carnivore, got rid of his sugar addiction, the sugar sweetened beverage addiction, and has now lost 350 pounds or something like that. But yeah, I have not had one of those, like a Coke or anything like that, in really decades. I stopped drinking that stuff in my 20s, quite honestly. I just never
Good for you.
really did that stuff.
So I have to ask also, of course, about the environment. Are we going to destroy the planet if everybody goes carnivore?
Well, I don't think everybody's going to go carnivore. So, I mean, that's certainly a hypothetical that I think will never exist. I don't think anybody will do any specific diet. There's always going to be people who have their own preferences. So, I mean, do I think that cows are destroying the planet as per se? I don't think that's the case. I think that certainly they have an impact, an environmental impact. Literally everything does. I mean, most people don't realize that. I use U.S. data because that's what I have more access to. Cows produce about 2% of our greenhouse gases here in the United States. Animal agriculture is about 4%. Plant agriculture is 5%. The healthcare sector produces up to 10% of our greenhouse gases. And so, if we look at it in a very overall picture, it's like, well, cows produce 2%. They're the largest emitter of any single food group. We need to cut that out. Well, what happens if you do that? Well, you cut out a very satiating part of the diet. What do people do? They replace it with ultra processed food. They get more sick. They use more healthcare, energy. And so maybe we just drive that. We just shift all that greenhouse gas from cows into the healthcare sector. So ultimately, I don't think that will be a benefit in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, we can, manage livestock in a way that is restorative. I mean, there's people that are doing that now. How practical is it to do it on a large scale? That's questionable. Certainly, we can do more of it than we're doing now. The UN at COP28 has just recommended that the developing world actually raise more livestock. Interestingly, which is kind of interesting. And they're asking the Western countries to cut back, but the developing countries to increase because of their poor levels of nutrient deficiency. So clearly, it is considered an essential part of the diet, even via the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. So I think this is obviously a hotly contested question. I think that by being so laser focused on one aspect of it, because when we look at greenhouse gas emissions, we usually look at it per volume of food or per calorie of food. But it's more than that. I mean, we get more than just calories or volume out of animal products. We get nutrients. We get some incredibly important nutrients that we cannot easily otherwise get in some of these other foods. So when you start looking at things like lysine, leucine, zinc, things like this that are critical nutrients for our body, and then compare that to greenhouse gases, we see that the cow outputs go way down and the lettuce outputs go way up, and it starts to it's just where you put your goalposts and what are you actually measuring? Are we measuring human health, nutrition, and thriving, or are we just measuring how many calories we can get out? Because if you just want to make a lot of calories, you would plant sugar everywhere. Sugar is a very calorically efficient greenhouse gas crop. And so, feed everybody sugar, which we already kind of do. So is that what we want? We want more of that? I don't think it's a good approach.
Complicated question, of course.
It is, yeah.
Controversial. And it's an interesting point of view also that we're going to look at weight of food or calories of food because, if you grow potatoes or beans and legumes, I'm sure it's pretty low carbon footprint per calorie. But when you look at vegetables, lettuce or something, I mean, it's not going to look all that great, right? Because there are almost no calories, almost no nutrition in it. I mean, it's all healthy food. I'm not against it in any way, but you don't get all that many calories from that kind of food.
Yeah, or nutrition, or bioavailable nutrition. It's interesting. Like back to the question, about sugar. It's interesting because we hear about, these cows in Brazil now occupying portions of the Amazon rainforest. And like, well, why are they there in the first place? Well, they got moved out of something called the Cerrado, which was in southern Brazil. Cerrado was the traditional grazing pasture lands. And guess what got planted in the Cerrado? Sugar. So they took over the traditional cow pasture with sugar crops, sugar plantations, and the cows went somewhere. So it's a very nuanced and complicated discussion.
It's very complicated. I guess none of us are the biggest experts on it, at least not me. Let's move on. I had another question, because this is controversial. Do calories matter? Is it all about what you eat, carbs? Do you have to count your calories?
Well, I would say calories certainly do matter. I mean, like I said, I'm on a carnivore diet. If I want to gain weight, I eat more calories. If I want to lose weight, I eat less calories. I think that clearly has a role. I mean, in a pretty big role, quite honestly. But at the same time, if I go from a diet of standard American junk food, donuts, Doritos, and Coca-Cola, and eat 2,000 calories a day, and then I go on a 2,000 calorie carnivore diet, I'm going to have some different physiological effects on my body. I mean, one, the protein percentage is higher. So certainly even the most diehard stringent calorie in, calorie out component or proponent will say that when matched for protein, right? Because that is a different macronutrient. So just that alone should indicate that, we know the thermic effect of protein. We know that it induces increased rates of NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So just the protein percentage alone, the average American's consuming 15%. I'm consuming 30%. Well, you looked at my stats. I think I was actually 40% on that particular day.
40,
I'm consuming 30 to 40% of my calories from protein. And I think that, whether or not, as David Ludwig and Gary Towns and some of those others would suggest, particularly David, that do carbs and fat have a differential metabolic effect? David Ludwig would say, sure, it does. Maybe to the tune of a couple hundred calories a day, perhaps, depending on how much you're eating. I think that, so calories do matter, but I mean, I can't control how much body heat I produce. I mean, it's not under my voluntarily control. So what controls that? Well, I think food has an impact on that as well. So, it's there. I mean, you could design just with protein alone, you could design a diet with more calories, but due to the thermic effect of protein would lead in, less energy consumed or less energy available for whatever body energy. So you could, because I hear people say that they actually ate more calories on carnivore. Maybe they ate 2,500 calories on carnivore versus the 2,000 they're eating on a standard American diet, and they lost weight, which is interesting, And again, it's not rigorously controlled, but so I think that, I'm the first guy to say that calories do matter, but I'm also the first guy to say that, but other things do too. And I think that's I think that's a pretty fair way to say that.
I mean, at the very least, it's like, okay, calories matter, but then the next question becomes, well, how do you then eat fewer calories if that's what your goal is? And if the answer is just count them and eat fewer, then that seems to be not really working for people. Like
it works for some people, right? It works for very disciplined bodybuilder, fitness people that this can grind it out for a few months, and but does it work over a 10-year period? Probably not.
I mean, maybe in the short term, but I wonder, even for the bodybuilders, they know how to do it, right? They know what kind of foods they are eating. They're not counting calories and going to the cheapest burger place and drinking soda, right?
Yeah, I mean they're eating protein and fiber, basically, is what they eat. What their diet is, right? Yeah.
So they make it work by eating very different foods, and that's my point. I think the way to be able to eat fewer calories is to eat more satiating foods.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the way I see it, and that's what the bodybuilders are doing. Like you said, protein and fiber, right? They know how to do it.
They're still dealing with hunger when they get down to the very last phases, for sure.
Course.
I mean, the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they're hungry and grouchy, but
they would never get there in the first place if they were eating
donuts, right? No, they're not getting there on donuts. It's interesting because you see some like very young people, and it's interesting how I think age impacts this for sure, because you see young athletes that consume a diet that is. And maybe it's because they have such tremendous outputs. You look at, I can see guys, professional athletes, NFL football players. I mean, their diet is McDonald's, Cokes, and French fries and hamburgers, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they're ripped. I mean, they are physical specimens. But you see them, after retirement or, at age 35, and all of a sudden, they don't look too good.
And that's age 35. They still have a long way to go there. So, yeah. So what's your take on if you want to increase your satiety per calorie or find foods that cause you to eat less? What do you think are the most important factors?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, I think that, find foods that are inherently satisfying. I know that's kind of a circular answer, but for me, I do very well with just, a lot of steak. I mean, it's interesting on that. I mean, I think the tool that you have is probably going to be helpful. I think you're going to find people that don't fit 100% into that what you say is satiating for one person may not be. So I think you still have to go back and trust but verify type of thing. Like, I mean, I'm not familiar with all your foods on there. I've seen some of the things you've been posting, and I'm like, if you rigorously test these things, and I think hopefully over time, as you'll get feedback from people saying, I tried this and for me it didn't work, and then you have to identify what's different about that person. What is, maybe there's some way to say you can, maybe men and women are different. Yeah, I mean that would be the biggest dichotomy that I would see that. Because interestingly, I mean, cholecystokinin, which I'm sure you're familiar with, it causes our gallbladder contract, but it also is a satiety hormone. There's studies that show there's actually differences in how that's stimulated between men, women, and children. And so it's like, for me, eating a steak is like, oh, I feel great. Some women will say, they may not have that effect. So it's interesting. Maybe that's mediated through CCK. I don't know.
Still a lot to learn for sure, and this is a work in progress. I think we'll keep basing it primarily on intervention studies, randomized controlled intervention studies in humans rather than anecdotes as far as we can. But it's always interesting to.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, and I think this is because even though it's anecdotal, but when you start having, let's say you have 10,000 members, that's a lot of data that you can leverage. That's hard to get in a randomized control trial. And you just, if you can add that to some sort of AI sort of analysis, you might be able to sort of dial it in better over time. It's going to be
really interesting to see what we can do with the data. But anyways, back to you. I would just like to, so if you want to lose a few pounds, if you want to get strong but leaner, even leaner.
Me personally?
Yes, you personally. What do you?
Yeah, I'll increase the protein percentage. I will dial up the protein and dial down the fat a little bit, and that's what I'll do. And then I might have to deal with a little bit of hunger through. There's tricks that I use. Like sometimes I'll make things that are very volume intense that are very low calorie. Like I'll make my own Jello. I'll take plain unflavored Jello and make a bowl that big, the biggest bowl as possible. Put a little bit of like electrolyte flavoring in there so it's palatable, and consume that. And that will fill me up. I will feel bloated and full, and I don't want to eat for whatever that period of time was that I was thinking about. I could crush another steak or something like that. So those are some of the tricks. But yeah, I mean, I will dial up my protein to where I might be consuming as much as 50% of my calories from protein, which is an incredibly high amount.
Right, that's very high.
But generally, I mean, for me, and I know there's people that will claim that fat is more satiating for them. And to me, honestly, if I overconsume fat, I get kind of nauseous, and that's a disincentive for me. So, but I don't really so I would prefer getting more protein because I think I just have better as far as body composition and athletic goals. I think protein, at least in my physiology, allows me to reach my goals better than excess fat would.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any fitness competitors trying to get lean by eating more fat. Have you heard of that?
There are some ketogenic bodybuilders that will do that. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're still eating plenty of protein. And even though they have a high percentage of fat, their caloric intake is overall down low. And so they still go into a caloric deficit. They still eat a lot of protein. but they're maybe on a higher fat approach. Maybe
higher
70%
fat
fat.
instead of carbs, then perhaps.
Well,
Which,
yeah, I mean, like I said, you've got
should work
to
perfectly.
ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, you've got to maintain, as we know, any weight loss strategy without protein is doomed to lead to lean mass loss. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
So you're going for some new world records, I think. What is that?
Yeah, well, I when I turned 50, I set a bunch of rowing world records on the Concept 2, right? So it's a rowing device, all the international Olympic rowers and everybody trains on, and there's 30, 40,000 years every year, competitors every year compete on this thing. They hold world championships. And, it was initially, it was 50 years and then it was going to be 60 years. And it was a 10-year increment. But recently they changed it to the 5-year increment. And I just happened to notice it the other day. I was looking up, somebody asked me about a record. And I looked, I see how I've got, and I said, oh, wait, now there's a 5-year category. So I'll be 57 in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, I look at a number of those records and they're all like, to me, they all look like these are all very easy. I mean, not super easy, but I think I can get those quite easily. I know, my goal is by end of January to have 4 new American records and 4 new world records on that. So I'll focus on that for the next 2 months. And, I can probably break a couple of them without training right now. And I'll just train a little bit up and hopefully get the rest of them.
So you have,
and without carbs too, or without, minimal to no carbs. So
minimum amount of carbs. Yeah. You had a very low carb day, clearly.
Andres, that actually was a high carb day for me, quite honestly. I mean, that because I don't usually eat that much yogurt. I mean, it's usually I don't eat it at all. But so usually it's like closer to zero. Carb. Yeah, 30 grams. Yeah.
So another question. I'm just curious. Who do you listen to when it comes to nutrition and health? Who are you sort of role models or the people you learn from?
I learned from a whole vast variety of people. I mean, I think that, I've learned some from you. I've learned some from Ted, who's I know is working with you. I listen to guys like Stu Phillips and Don Layman and, I've Lane Norton, I mean, some of these other people that are critical of carnivore, I still listen to them. I take in what Alan Aragon, I mean, people like that. I think they all have good things to say and their advice is not bad. I think some of them unfairly misinterpret what I'm trying to say about carnivore. But I think there's a lot of, I even listen to some of the vegan people. I at least get their perspective on some of this stuff.
Who do you listen to? Who do you think is good there?
Oh,
to listen to. Just curious.
Well, I mean, I'll I don't know who's really good about this. I mean, I've listened to like Joel Kahn stuff because he and I have had a relatively friendly rivalry, I suppose. He's had some stuff that's interesting. I think I'm trying to think who else is out there that I think has put out some interesting stuff. I think there's a doctor who calls herself the skeptical doctor or something. She's like Anna Boric.
Anna Boric, yeah.
Yeah, I've read her stuff. I mean, I mostly disagree with it, but I see because for whatever reason, Twitter or now X presents these people in my feed. I don't follow them, but I just show up. So I read what they have to say. And sometimes I agree. Sometimes I make fun of it, but I mean, the studies are there. And, again, I think a lot of these studies are unfortunately they're underpowered. I don't say underpowered. They're limited. I mean, like I said, we just can't do good human studies in my view to answer the questions that we think we're answering. I mean, we can't. It's not like an animal study where you can just kill everybody at the end, cut them open and see what happened. I mean, that probably won't pass most IRB processes. So yeah, I mean, there's some people I listen. I at least take note of what they're saying. And, like I said, sometimes it's to pick it apart and to say where it's limited. But at the same time, like I said, I'm not the guy out here saying keto is the best diet and everybody should do carnivore and LDL doesn't matter. You won't hear that from me, or vegetables are poison for everybody. I don't say those things, although I see those things in the carnivore community. And sometimes I kind of shake my head and cringe a little bit when I see that, because it's not what I'm trying to represent. So anyway, hopefully people see me as somewhat.
I'm thankful for that. It's been a good talk, and I mean, it seems to me you're one of the most thoughtful and balanced people in the carnivore community. Would you agree?
I try to be. I think there's another one, Amber O'Hearn, I think is wonderful as well. I mean, she's one of the ones. I should mention she's one of the ones I've looked up to as a source of information. She's not a physician. She's just I mean, she's a smart engineer type, but yeah, interesting. So
engineers are often they bring an interesting perspective to things. So if people want to know more about you or what you're up to, anything else you want to share, how can people find you? What's going on?
Yeah, well, obviously Rivera.com if you're in the U.S. and you're interested in, sort of lifestyle nutrition-based healthcare, we're there for that. We've got about 5,000 people on our waiting list right now. So we start seeing patients, I think, the first of the year. I'm on social media. I'm on X, which formerly Twitter, at capital S, capital B, so S Baker MD. I'm on Instagram at Shawn, SHAWN, Baker 1967. I've got a YouTube channel, Shawn Baker MD, and I've got a TikTok one too, which I'm embarrassed to admit, but Shawn Baker MD as well. So anyway, that's where you can find me.
Well, that's great. Just to wrap it up, if you can leave people listening with one tip, one piece of advice, what would it be?
I don't think you should be outsourcing your health to somebody else. Don't put your health in somebody else's hands. I think you have to you need to be not disempowered, but empowered to realize that you have a huge, huge impact on your health outcomes and and basically your quality of life. I mean, because I think a lot of people have sort of resigned themselves to, there's nothing I can do about it. There's a lot you can do about it. And, it may take a little bit of hard work, but it's certainly worth it in the end.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for taking the time. It was great.
I'm sure we'll talk again, Andreas. Thank you so much.